I had a life. I was free. I had a voice. Here I am nothing, if anything, a statistic. I have no identity. What am I? Who am I? I am a scream that fades out, a longing lost in the nothingness of indifference. I am a broken dream. They want my work. They want my money. But me? They don't want me. I am the undesirable, the scapegoat. I am the pawn in a chess game. I have sweated blood, living my life in the fields, in the factories. I am the gardener, the cook, the housekeeper, the nanny. I live as a slave in the 21st century. What am I? Who am I? I am grandfather, father, mother, brother, son, friend. But above all, I am a human being who only wants to have its dignity back. Yo tenía una vida, era libre, tenía una voz. Aquí no soy nada, si acaso una estadística. No tengo identidad. ¿Qué soy? ¿Quién soy? Soy un grito que se apaga, un anhelo que se pierde en el vacío de la indiferencia. Soy un sueño roto. Quieren mi trabajo, quieren mi dinero, pero a mí no me quieren. Soy el indeseable, el chivo expiatorio. Soy el peón en un juego de ajedrez. He sudado sangre, dejando mi vida en los campos de cultivo, en las fábricas. Soy el jardinero, el cocinero, la afanadora, la niñera. Vivo como esclavo en pleno siglo XXI. ¿Qué soy? ¿Quién soy? Soy abuelo, padre, madre, hermano, hijo, amigo, pero sobre todo soy un ser humano que lo único que quiere es recuperar su dignidad.
On behalf of the Orange County Interfaith Network, I would like to welcome you to this year's Community Forum series. The purpose of our program is simple. The more you know, the less you fear. Our mission as a network is to connect, promote, and facilitate interfaith engagement, dialogue, and understanding. We define interfaith itself as education via dialogue. Our belief is that from dialogue comes understanding and respect. And from that understanding, we can reach closer to compassion for others. As you can see, this year we have adapted our forum series as a virtual roundtable discussion. We have teamed up with local universities, organizations, and today to talk about key issues in our community that are affecting us right now. We hope these conversations continue beyond just this screen, and we are empowered with the knowledge we receive from our esteemed panelists today. We look forward to these conversations serving as a catalyst for greater understanding and respect for all. So thank you to the audience and to our panelists today. And with that, I want to welcome our educational fellows, Natasha Huang, to kick us off and introduce today's program. Take it away, Natasha.
Thank you, Gagandeep. We developed our 2020 Community Forum series with one idea in mind. We wanted stories to increase our understanding and propel us into action. So our theme is sharing our stories from understanding to action. Along with the rest of the world, we have had to adjust to current times, moving our public forums to a virtual roundtable discussion format. Joining us today are Teresa LeFranc, poet and activist. Rigoberto Lizardi, community organizer for Resilience, Orange County. Julie Yeeun Kim, artist and activist. Dania Alkhouli, spoken word artist and representing a country called Syria. David Jaimes, community organizer for Cruz, which is Clergy and Laity United, for faith organizer for the Interfaith movement for human integrity. We would like to begin by sharing our stories, and we invite Dania to start us off.
Thank you so much, Natasha and Gagandeep and OCIN for hosting this. I'm going to share a story through spoken word with the piece What I Am, which really resonates a lot with Teresa's beautiful piece that she shared earlier. What are you? I have known this question for 20-something years, known far too many answers and never the right one. I am seeds planted beneath American soils, but a heart still pleasurably entangled in the veins of Syrian sands. I am the daughter of a resilient ancestry that has survived centuries of ruins, that will survive centuries more, that will continue to uphold the title of the country with the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. The world. I am bold architecture standing tall, welcoming, sheltering not only our sisters and brothers, but all of our kin seeking refuge from the borders drawn around us. Little did we know these borders are prison gates in disguise. I am depths of elaborate gold etchings and woodworks made by calloused hands that yearn to invite you to explore the intricacies of their wealthy history. I am the intoxicatingly beautiful scent of fresh bread from bakeries that rise with the sun. It is this bread that unites us all, or it once did. How have we become a world that breaks souls instead of bread? A world that asks me what I am, not what I can do. I am a refreshing cup of licorice root juice on a hot summer day, poured from the ornate copper kettle in the shade of ancient beauty. I am the culmination of art and literature, pride and intellect, esteemed values of the Syrian world that produce the rich talents left stranded atop the freezing waters of the Aegean Sea. I am who shamelessly holds on to the age-old legacy laughed about. The Arabs breed only doctors, lawyers, and engineers. It is from this emphasis on knowledge that we produce the best of these three and more, because what I am is of the world whose origins caution against ignorance because it is never bliss. I am sweet aubergine-colored Damascene mulberries, sprouting only from our soils during a certain season, delighting the senses in a flavor that remains a nostalgic imprint upon the lips. And from these lips, I am the poet fusing the dialects of my grandmother from Aleppo and my cousin from Damascus with my multinational dialect of American verbiage. I am as colorful and as complex as the tapestries woven on the loom that has outlasted a journey from BC to AD amidst rumbles of war. I am the fighter, striving till death to preserve my Syrian history, my Syrian culture, and my Syrian people, the same way they fight to preserve their lives, their roots, their trades, and their landmarks once recognized as monumentous heritage sites. And I am the light, flickering from this candle I hold for Syria, praying to never extinguish in doing all that I do. This is who I am.
That was beautiful, Dania. Thank you so much. The power of spoken word can really bring us into another person's experience. And one of the beauties of us all being here together is that each one of us has a story. So next up, I would like to invite Rigo to tell us about who you are and what brought you to today. Take it away, Rigo.
Yeah, thank you, Dania, and thank you, Teresa, for those lovely words. Those words are medicine to myself, and I just want to appreciate y'all for saying those beautiful words. So my name is Rigo Lizardi. I am a community organizer for Resilience Orange County. A little bit about myself is I was born in San Juan del Rio, Querétaro, in Mexico. I lived in Mexico for about 2 years with only my mom because because my dad was already living in the U.S. Right, my mom and dad decided to bring me to the U.S. so we can unite and strive to work for the American dream. We thought we were only going to live here until I graduated high school, but plans changed. Now we have a family here in Santana. I have 2 younger siblings and a dog named Pancho. I feel home here in Santana. Santana has been the closest to what Mexico was ever before gentrification ever hit here. It is crazy. It is crazy when these white supremacist racists say that we do not belong here. We are criminals, murderers, etc. But I really want to acknowledge that the ones who carry the work and make this country run are our families, our communities, and many of the essential workers right now during this pandemic are literally our families putting their life on the line so we can provide food, provide resources for our family. And I just want to acknowledge that I really love and I've noticed that there's a lot of like inequity and injustice within communities, especially people of color, trans, queer, incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, undocumented migrant communities, and which is why I got into the organizing field. I am undocumented myself. I am impacted, and I've seen and felt all these injustice and oppressions, and which is why I got into organizing. I think I mentioned that already. But within I work for Resilience Orange County. Within Resilience Orange County, our mission is to promote resilient youth leaders and engage in critical work, building youth-oriented institutions in OC. We work towards social systemic transformation while promoting healing trauma and informed, culturally relevant practices that are inclusive of all members of community. We have within ROC, we have 2 departments that focus on building capacity with youth and supporting and campaign works where we allow the youth to expand their knowledge, expand their leadership skills, and also engage in any juvenile system work, campaign work. But also we also have the community department, which addresses the immigration enforcement work. We have a branch of the participatory defense and the rapid response that really supports the community in support cases. And within the community department, I'm part of the capacity building, which is Alto Polimira. Within Alto Polimigra, we focus in building capacity, building knowledge and consciousness of all this immigration trends that happen, and we're there to use our voice to advocate for these injustices. And this is really my passion, and I really would love to live in a world where we don't live with fear. We live, I would really love to live in a world where we're currently living in. We can call it home. And yeah, that's a little bit about myself and why I got into organizing. And thank you, and I appreciate every single one of y'all, and thank you.
That is amazing, Rigo. I love the theme of a world without fear, and it sounds like bravery is such a theme in your own life, starting from your parents being brave enough to come and bring you here, and then just all the things that you've done with your own life so far in, being as brave as you can in this world and making your voice be heard. So thank you for sharing your story. So we're going to keep hearing lots of stories throughout today's segment, but one important piece of translating stories to action is actually understanding these topics and these issues on a deeper level. So Gagandeep is going to help us draw out some of the specifics of these issues. Take it away, Gagandeep.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Teresa, Dania, Rigo, for sharing your story and the story of millions across this country. We're now going to shift over to our next segment of our program, which is the understanding. Again, we've heard from these amazing storytellers. And now to help better understand these various stories, we delve more into the terms and issues themselves. We're going to be introducing sort of our educators in this segment to really speak more on this topic and why we really should care. We'll start off with Hilda Cruz, who's a faith organizer and interfaith movement for human integrity. Hilda, perhaps if you could start us off by helping us better understand this topic first, realizing only recently that immigrants are put into 4 distinct categories: refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, and immigrants. I'm wondering if you would break each of those out and clarify the distinctions of each, and how, if any way, do the various categories affect the work and relationship you are all doing in the front lines on behalf of your respective groups and organizations. If you could also please share with us your story as well to better highlight this topic, that would be really greatly appreciated. Take it away.
Thank you again, David. And first of all, my gratitude for these roundtables where we are allowed to not only share our stories, but really educate others about the complicated issues of immigration. And so in my telling the story today, I wrote it in a way so that we can look at history and how also laws have impacted immigrants such like me, right? And so I tell my story in this way. I was brought to the US when I was 9 years old. This was back in the late 70s. My grandfather, who had come during the Bracero program, had become a US citizen and had submitted a petition to sponsor his daughter, which is my mom, and us, her family. The other factor that led to our coming to the US was the fact that my dad had just lost his job. He used to work for an American company, Kimberly-Clark, and once he lost his job, he was let go. He decided to come and join his extended family of siblings who had already lived here for more than a decade. So back then, it was well known that it would take years for this process to go through. And back then, families would come and live in the US so that they would be closer to their families as they awaited this process of becoming legal. So going from people who are not documented, what they told us, we do have documents, but they use the word undocumented, right? And so in order to process our status, it was going to take a long time, so we came to be close with our families. Well, those of us who were waiting for the approval of the immigration case lived with a fear of an immigration raid, which meant you would be picked up possibly by ICE and deported to your country of origin. And while this happened, you were also separated from your family. It also meant that any work that you acquired was going to be underpaid with no benefits, and you would have to put up with abuses, to be overworked with no overtime, and if you spoke up, that you would be fired. I became one of the 2.7 million persons who benefited from Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. And I became then a permanent resident. So before I was undocumented, then I became a permanent resident. By then I was fluent in English. I had lived through employer injustices and understood the legal benefit that this reform meant for me. After 5 years, once I proved that I was this law-abiding and contributing member of society, I was able to become a naturalized US citizen. And so did 250,000 persons by 1996. In all of my faith formation classes, as I worked as a faith organizer, I know that we, various faiths, value the legislative process, the creation of laws and systems, because they should protect and serve our society. But what I have kept seeing taking place only serves and protects special interest groups and corporations which take part in the creation of laws that criminalize people of color to feed a growing for-profit prison system. And so it is by no coincidence that in 1996, when all those people became US citizens, there was another law that came into place called the Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996. Later on, we would know it as a 287G. The act was designed to improve border control by imposing criminal penalties for racketeering, alien smuggling, and the use or creation of fraudulent immigration-related documents. All good here, right? Especially we were going after drug cartels and human traffickers and those others who exploit people. Those sounded like great laws. The act also mandates that immigrants who are unlawfully present in the U.S. for over 180 days, but under 365 days, must remain outside the U.S. for 3 years once they seek to legalize their status. If they remain in the U.S. for 365 days or more, they must stay outside the U.S. for 10 years unless they obtain a waiver. And those waivers are really difficult to obtain. So for those who, like me, who lived in the U.S. while awaiting the process, could no longer stay, and if you did, you were penalized for up to 10 years outside the country. This clause, which was created in 1996, has many family separation, and when they would show up to their immigration interview in their country of origin, instead of getting their green cards, they were told they could no longer come in the country for 3 to 10 years as a penalty. Okay, so the process became more and more difficult and no longer allowed for families to be reunified. It penalized them, okay? But it wasn't just this case, it also caused them to be criminalized and barred from applying again. And if they try to come in, they would be sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. So the mandatory detention was officially authorized also in between 1996 and 1998. So before we had these local places where if you were an undocumented immigrant, most of the time at the borders, they would hold you. And these places at the border were the detention facilities. It was during this time, along with the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, that we saw an increase from back then seeing 8,500 people being detained to over 42,000 people that are being detained nowadays in our immigration detention facilities. And this is every single day. And the other thing that people must know is that these are for-profit facilities where including the children have been kept these past few years. In the last 3 years, the White House administration has also changed and challenged immigration categories for people who have lived in our neighborhoods for a very, very long time. And so we used to talk about that deferred action for child arrivals. Most people know this as DACA. Well, that was removed and it's being challenged in the courts. And what this would mean is if it is removed, we're gonna see ICE coming after some of these recipients and possibly detaining them. The other people that have, whose status has changed is people with temporary protected statuses. This was given to them due to humanitarian emergencies because of natural disasters or armed conflicts in their country. So it is not a refugee status, it's just a temporary protected status. Then we have the asylum seekers. And so in the past 3 years, we have seen these caravans coming from Central America. And these are actually people who under international law have the right to seek for asylum. And the law says that in order to apply for asylum, you have to first reach and go to the country where you're gonna be petitioned. So you cannot petition for asylum from your country of origin. You have to leave your country, get there, and then apply for asylum. And as we continue to challenge the expansion of these detention facilities, this is where, through asylum seekers, this system is being fed right now. So we have the Adelanto detention facility, where you will find a lot of these people that came in the caravan being detained in this for-profit detention facility. So today, billions of people are migrants worldwide, right? But in California and the Mexico border, there are over 600,000 asylum seekers who are being forced to remain in Mexico right now because of COVID-19. A lot of them are moving because rich countries have stole from them their future, whether it is the Iraqi, the Syrians fleeing the effects of these illegal wars, or Africans seeking to work for their former European colonial masters, or Salvadorians, Guatemalans, and Hondurans trying to get into the country that overturned their governments. And now this same country is selling them guns. They are coming here because we were once there. And so this is what we are seeing. One aspect we must realize is that without immigration, America's economy growth would have been only 15%, much lower in the 1990s. Immigrants count for 14% of the American population, but we also are all new businesses, right? They started a quarter of all new businesses in the last decade. And the economy, at least California, has become more of a pro-immigrant state because they value the how much the immigrants have really given in helping the growth of our economy. And we continue to see a lot of injustices. And so for that, I'm going to invite our colleague David to come and talk to us about his work of economic justice, because I know that a lot of the work that they do is usually surround the immigrants who are continuously being shorthanded by these systems that we have in place.
Thank you, Hilda. So when we talk about this idea of justice and economic justice, it's a very big topic, and it is could be objectionable. And the reason is that because some of us understand what justice can look like. It could look like many different things. Right now, we're seeing people protesting in Huntington Beach here in Orange County, wanting justice for them to go get their haircuts, wanting justice to get back to work. They're wanting justice to whatever they want to do. That's their way. That's their call to justice right now. And meanwhile, we have other folks that are also organizing protests outside of Adelanto, asking for the release of the detainees there, because that group sees that the justice is for them to be out of harm because of COVID-19. And so you have one group of people calling for one thing and the other calling for another. There is this deep understanding, and in my faith tradition, and what we understand is justice. And for me, I grew up in the Latino church, a Pentecostal Latino church, and I always read the Bible in Spanish. And I would always read the word justicia. And the word justicia, I didn't read the English Bible really until I was in college. And as I reread a lot of the scriptures that would mention the word justice, they would translate in English to righteousness and justice. In the Bible, though, in the Spanish translation, it would just read justice. And so even at a young age, even through my language tradition, it was understood that righteousness and justice are similar or the same. And so what does justice mean is to do the right thing. And so what does it mean to do the right thing? That's very objectionable. You know, the right thing could look to one person and could look to the other. But this is where God challenges us. And I feel my faith tradition really speaks into, not only are we doing the right thing for people, but we must do the right thing for the most harmed, marginalized, and vulnerable people in our societies. If we want to see not just true justice, We want to make sure that those that are most harmed, those that are most targeted and most impacted by unjust laws are the first people in the priority for us to see justice released to them. We cannot just assume that someone's needs are similar as other needs. I was actually awoken by this because CLU and many other community organizations this weekend just launched a relief fund for undocumented immigrants in California. Governor Newsom gave a little bit of the budget to give a little relief to undocumented. And when I mean a little bit, it's less than 10%. It's about 6% of undocumented that they're going to reach, 6% of the population that they're going to actually support of the undocumented population in California. And the need is great. Not only are the organizations trying to get hotlines and answer the phones and go to their websites are crashing. Organizers like us are getting called every day over and over by people, and not because just people want to bug and they just want to get what they need. Is because there is a great need, a greater need than for you to get your haircut, a greater need than concerts, a greater need than for you to do that. And on top of that, a lot of people that are in that level where we're seeing in Orange County protesting in Huntington Beach and those areas, those are the same people that are walking without masks and not caring, showing a greater injustice and showing a greater lack of love and care for society. And so whose justice do we really subscribe to? The immigrant, the worker, the families that are at probably after 2 months trying to figure out with their landlord if they could stay and not get evicted. The same families that have multiple children that they have to feed and they have to take care of and they have to go to work. So when we talk about economic justice, we talk about what not just the dollar signs, but the impact of policies that are affecting some of these people. And I see a lot of exploitation in Orange County because that's where my context is here in Orange County. I see a lot of essential workers that are working every day in the grocery stores, in the deliveries, those in hospitals. Many of them are immigrants. Many of them are low-wage workers. Many of them are those that that society does not deem worthy for $15 an hour. And I sit to think that those are the very people that are feeding us, are keeping us, keeping the society going, and those are the people that we're exploiting the most. So when we talk about economic justice, my faith tells me that when we look at the margins of society and we see the conditions that these people are in, we need to know that that is a marker of where our priorities and our values lie. If I would look at our markers and our priorities in Orange County and the people here that live in Orange County, and see that how Latinos, Latinas, the Latinx community has been getting greater impacted in this time under coronavirus, not only in the higher numbers, we're seeing that they're continuing to be impacted by ICE. They're continuing to do that. Not in Orange County is a little different. In LA County, we're seeing all over the country where even our African-American brothers and sisters continue to be shot dead in the street. And that is another issue. And that could also be an economic issue. So when we talk about justice, we want to talk about what must be done right. So in justice and righteousness, what are we doing right? But not only that, we need to do it in a way that is equitable. And I would like to kind of just finish sharing that CLU. It stands for Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. And what we do is we try to educate and organize and mobilize various faith communities to accompany workers And many of them are immigrants for their struggle for good jobs and dignity. And a lot of it works with hotel workers. We work with folks that are working in airports, and we're working with the immigrant community. And I want to just share, at least here in Orange County, not only is the need great, but what is needed is for the faith community to come with their faith, to share their faith and to share the hope that we have, knowing that all our faiths want to see peace, want to see justice done in this earth. And not only from one tradition and from various traditions, because those are the people that will be most receptive to that message.
Wow. I don't know about you guys, but my blood is like hearing. These are a lot of issues that impact a lot of people. And I really thank Hilda and David for sharing your personal stories, but also giving us some of the context to understand these issues, because these issues don't just stand alone in a vacuum. There's a history behind it with our country's legislation, with how we term things, what we call certain things, even the term of justice and what that means. So I'm just really struck by this need to have justice and also balance that with compassion on the peoples whose lives are literally every moment being impacted. Our lives haven't stopped because of quarantine necessarily. People are still struggling more than before. And so it's important for us to realize that even if we are privileged enough to be sheltering in place, some people are still facing some of these inequities on a daily basis. So I do thank you both. And you know, just as David mentioned, this is an interfaith effort, and it's also a global context that we have in Southern California. And so I know David is friends with our next speaker, Julie, from their time in school together. And so let's shift it over to Gagandeep to bring in some other perspectives from around the world.
Yes, and thank you all for, again, sharing your truths. I think definitely having this faith perspective of what David just shared is so important, especially when it comes to the message that we're also trying to add as Orange County Interfaith Network. Julie, you yourself are an immigrant from Korea. Within the last several months, the number of hate incidents and discrimination towards Asian immigrants and citizens has risen at an alarming rate. Some of the most recent stats show at 60% increase of incidents. As an activist, working with so many of these immigrant populations, what are you seeing and hearing on the front lines? Do the immigrants who are already, I would imagine, feeling fearful in a new country, more fearful and more unsure of themselves than would be the normal? And what is it that you would like our audience to know better about this particular group being affected during this pandemic? And any other thoughts you would like to share?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'd first off like to start by saying that there are so many different voices coming from the Asian American community, but really the many communities within Asian America. There are some people, based on what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, who are incredibly alarmed, and they wear their fear very visibly. You know, they talk about it. They change the way they're going about their lives, right? When, where are they going to market? They try to limit the time that they spend by themselves when they're out in public, or maybe they just don't go out in public at all if necessary, if it's easier to, and there are people who travel in pairs too. But then there are other Asian Americans who have so deeply internalized their own invisibility that they don't recognize that this is something to sit down and seriously consider. And they have a hard time just saying, yeah, Asian Americans are experiencing this thing and it's okay to mourn that. It's okay to be indignant. Because historically, Asian Americans have been excluded. They have been met with intense xenophobia, fatal xenophobia, and they've just had to live with it, right? So there's a variety. There's a variety of voices, a variety of experiences. People are processing this in different ways. But one thing is very clear to me in particular, and I think to most people that I speak to and who I encounter, is that there is now, and there has always been a very deep-seated anti-Asian attitude in the U.S. And that is very clear if you look at the laws, the way that the U.S. has dealt with Asian Americans legally, but also geographically. There's a reason why ethnic enclaves are so prominent among Asian American immigrant groups. It wasn't because we only wanted to stay with each other. That was not the primary reason. It was because we had to. There were no other spaces for us to inhabit. And Chinatowns in San Francisco, also in Los Angeles, are huge monuments to that kind of history. The Exclusion Act is another. And so these exclusion laws, socially, geographically, physically, but also legally, are manifestations of the xenophobia that we are seeing kind of re-erupt again. We're also seeing a lot of attacks on our most vulnerable people. So there are several different research efforts that are trying to collect the hate crime stories, reports of these. Professor Russell Jung at San Francisco State University is, I cannot remember, I think it's stopapihate.org, I'm not too sure. But every week he releases reports. So he and his team gather these stories. They compile it into a neat report, and it's available for all people to see. And not so surprisingly, actually, if you really think about it, 70% consistently, about almost 70% of these attacks are on women, are on Asian American women. And a significant portion of the people who are being victimized by hate crimes are also our elderly. And I think that says a lot. I think this is a conversation that I had with my students that I teach, and they very quickly point out, well, it could be that men aren't reporting these crimes, but it's probably because the people who want to unleash their anger are doing it at the easiest targets that they see. This is not actually about fear as much as it is about an excuse to be hateful. That's very clear, because if you are worried about Asian Americans having a virus, then what is your reason for lunging at them? That actually increases your chances of supposedly catching the virus too, right? Then, so there's certain things in the narratives that we're seeing that show that this is more about the xenophobia than it really is about any sort of calculated, logical responses to fear. And if I could add one more thing too, many Asian American families, I don't want to speak for all, are dealing with COVID in different ways, because many Asian Americans have small businesses, which are disproportionately impacted at the moment because of xenophobia, but also because of the lockdown. They live in ethnic enclaves where people are no longer willing, well, now they can't visit, but prior to lockdown too, they were already hurting for months before because people didn't want to visit infested towns, right? So we're experiencing not only prejudice, but we're also experiencing hits on multiple registers. And this is a really important time for surrounding communities in solidarity to really stand with us. Yeah, that's how yeah.
Thank you, Julie, for your thoughts and really helping us get a better understanding and perspective of what's going on and what Asian Americans are now having to sort of face. I think one thing we've realized is that the xenophobia has always been there, and I think there's always someone who's ends up being the face depending on sort of the trajectory of where our country is at the moment. I think one of the things that you definitely talked about these incidents and hate crimes, the biggest thing that we've seen is that it is important to get these reported. One of the things that we want to do as part of Orange County Interfaith Network is to make sure these incidents are being reported. So one thing that we asked our audience, you'll see below the link will be provided to report a hate crime. So if you do see any incidents in this community, be it with our Latino community, our immigrant community, specifically right now with our Asian Americans, it is important to get those reported, because we will not know how much impact this will have in the coming months as we see this sort of virus continue. I want to segue to Dania Alkhouli. You shared this beautiful poem with us earlier in the segment. One thing that we know about you personally is that you have this amazing organization called Country Called Syria, along with your mother, Maria Kani. When the Syrian Revolution started in 2012, you guys started this to really better humanize the Syrian people and your motherland, and what had sort of become known as this war-torn country. You created this traveling exhibit that would showcase historical and cultural artifacts from Syria. But now it seems that during this pandemic, with our borders now closed, we have almost forgotten that humanity component during this sort of pandemic. We're almost forgetting this whole community that is now really stuck waiting for refuge. What is it that you, from your knowledge and background, you could really share with the audience of what's really going on with the overall region in the world, and what is your hope that can come out of this now that we are in this sort of new crisis? And how do we really navigate during this time to really assist these refugees?
Thank you, Gagandeep. You hit the nail on the head by saying the word humanize, and that's kind of pretty much my fixation, my goal, especially with our nonprofit. So our nonprofit was founded in 2012, a year after the revolution started, and that was really the goal, because we noticed that a great majority of people actually didn't even know what Syria was or where it was located. Growing up and telling people that I was Syrian, they had no idea what that was. And now when you say Syria, people know, but it's always, associated with something very negative. And as Julie mentioned, I mean, honestly, I resonated with everything that she said, because it's like applicable to the Middle Eastern communities as well. The rise in Islamophobia and just the hate towards Middle Eastern communities is just constantly increasing. And it hasn't stopped with this pandemic. And I think the biggest problem is that Syrian refugees in specific, they face this surge of being like the hot commodity or the hot topic when they first got here. And so they had this flurry of support, but they felt, and this is from what I've heard from Syrian refugees themselves, is that they felt really exploited and that it wasn't actual longstanding support. And now that something else has come into the news, they've become second priority or last year's news. And so for them, for those that are here, there's so many different resources that we can provide them to support them and help them continue adjusting to this new life, especially with what's going on right now. Imagine having to adjust to fleeing from war, coming to a new country, experiencing a new culture, not understanding the language, and then suddenly being in lockdown and having to deal with a new fear, or those that have actually contracted COVID-19, having to deal with this new illness on top of everything else. So the biggest thing that often a lot of people forget is that humanity of refugees, that refugee just becomes a label, and everyone thinks their problems are only related to that refugee vacuum or sphere, and they forget that these people also have normal people problems, you know, the problems that we experience on a daily basis when we're not refugees or immigrants, be it marital problems or mental health struggles or financial struggles. And so there's all these things piling up that just makes it even more difficult that they have to deal with the refugee status and now COVID-19. And I think a lot of people are also unaware that many Syrian refugees in refugee camps and in Syria itself are dealing with the COVID-19 crisis as well. And this has impacted where funds go now. It's more along the lines of let's support them in their healing process from this versus the refugee thing is no longer the priority. It's how do we tackle this virus and help them sustain their livelihood so that they can survive, and then we can move on to the next phase once this is over. So a big part of why we started this nonprofit was really just to connect the general public to understand the humanity behind these people and our culture and our homelands. And I really appreciate having such a platform where we're invited to come as we are with our own faith and our activism to share these things, because as an artist and an activist, a lot of spaces try to maintain secularism, and so you don't feel like you're welcome to talk about what you feel like your calling is in your faith. And so having this platform allows us to really showcase everything that we have to offer for our communities and our service. And that's really what I love with working with my mom on our nonprofit, is that we come as we are and we welcome and we showcase Syria. And Syrians are populated by Christians, Muslims, and Jews, various faiths. It's not just Muslim communities. But I think a lot of that is not seen, especially in America, and that's what drives that racism and that hate, is that people assume all these Middle Easterns are one faith and one collective, and they just generalize them, and this racism and hate continues. I know David mentioned the protests that were happening. I live in Huntington Beach, so I'm seeing it firsthand. And you're right, it's a lot of the people that are these protesters that walk around without masks and they want to get their nails done. And I'm sitting here thinking, seriously, you want to get your nails done, you can't tolerate it anymore because you don't have your nails done. But we still have this room for hate and lack of priorities when there are so many communities that need our support and our help right now. I think the biggest takeaway for me is it's very hard to do a lot overseas and support the refugee camps besides just donating to the various organizations that are supporting. It's what can we do for the refugees that are here and not just Syrians? There are so many here that could still use our support and that need our support, and that we can look into helping and assisting during this time, especially whether it's financially or health-wise, or offering different ways to help them within their own family units as well. That's the biggest takeaway that I would say for the Middle Eastern populations here in Southern California, at least.
Thank you, Dania, for sharing that perspective. I think for us here, it's important that we're not forgetting any aspects of our immigration population during this time, because the need is now more than ever to help, like you said, in whether that's financially supporting, helping with getting test kits available to these populations that are not being, given the priority but are going to be affected the most during this time. I think one thing that we'll be segueing into now is from understanding to action. And I think we'll have you in a little bit talk about some of those action items that you just spoke about more specifically, if possible. Part of what we've just learned today in this program is really knowing who is our immigrant population, who are the faces. Through all of you as panelists today, we've gotten to see some of not only the faces of these organizations that are really working to tackle and humanize this sort of crisis that we're seeing through whether it's hate incidents, whether it's through this pandemic, or just in general, not getting the care or the voice heard of these individual groups. We want to thank you all for really helping us understand more deeply about what it is that is the real issue at stake right now, especially in Orange County, but really understanding, you know, who is this immigrant population, and learning that through Hilda and David, and what is the economic impact that they're all kind of getting during this time. But now it's really getting to the action portion. So what can we as an audience do? Natasha, I'll let you take it away and really delve deeper into this portion.
Thank you, Gagandeep. You know, I just reflect back to earlier in the conversation when Rigo said he really is hoping for a world without fear. And in so many of the stories we've been hearing, both individual stories and the story of what's been going on collectively, there is a lot of fear out there. Some of that fear is really irrational. It comes from this human need to self-protect and to other things that we don't understand or people that we don't understand. And so I think part of what we'd like to do as Orange County Interfaith Network is to educate people so that people aren't so easily jumping to fear, because we have more tools and more understanding to actually engage productively. I think about, you know, some of our panelists have shared about the role of faith and a God that prioritizes those on the margins, right? A God of liberation who we want to aspire to also take after in our humanity, to be on the side of those who are most vulnerable and marginalized. And so speaking of the role of education, I'd like to invite Julie to share with us one more time. You are a lecturer of Asian American Studies at Cal State Long Beach. And I'd love to just hear from you on your perspective as an educator.
Yeah, thank you. This has been an interesting time to teach Asian American Studies. I haven't been teaching long, but it's been a couple years that I've grown into this rhythm. I know what the semester is supposed to look like. I have syllabi, but this semester everything was just tossed up in the air, especially because halfway through we had to go into lockdown and shelter in place. I guess, well, I want to share more about my experiences as an educator and then offer some more maybe general words of advice. So my students in one particular class they're about a week away from turning in their second semester essays right when we went into lockdown. So this is at the height of coronavirus, really at the beginning when it's just about to take off and everything is going crazy. And I see them, and then 1 week later, they all turned in their papers, and about 2/3 of them wrote about the coronavirus, or they mentioned it in some way in their intro and their conclusion, wherever it was necessary, or they felt that it was necessary. And so I knew it was obviously on their minds. And then as an Asian American educator in an Asian American Studies classroom, I felt that it was my responsibility to talk to them about this. So it has been at the center of my curriculum. And after seeing their essays, I realized I can't just pretend like class is going to be the same. So I actually redesigned the last unit of one of my classes that I teach to talk specifically about the coronavirus. And so we looked at where does it come from. So we're looking at the wet markets in Wuhan, China. We're looking at who does it disproportionately affect, and it was working class people. We found out it doesn't come from people eating bats. Unfortunately, we still have to keep telling people that. And so I integrated it fully into my curriculum. We looked at where it came from, then the ways it affects community, how we experience health, but also the lack of health in community, how it really only takes one sick person to jeopardize an entire community. And that's why we have to be vigilant in looking after one another. So that was one thing that I did in my classroom. It looks like my students enjoyed it, that they got a lot out of it. For educators out there, if you are like me and you see your classroom as the primary place of your activism, and if you are an Asian American teacher yourself, number one, I don't think you have to take on all the work. It's not you don't have to bear the burden, the world's on your shoulder. Bear the burden of the world on your shoulder. But at the same time, students are looking to you, especially other students of color, students who are of Asian descent as well. So please be encouraged knowing that you are a model, a role model. If you can bring in those lessons, I have some great resources that you can look through. I have handouts and entire unit portion of the syllabus for one particular class that I'd like to share as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Julie. Really appreciate that. It sounds like, you know, all of us have had to roll with the punches and do a lot of adjusting, even as we are finding actions and new actions and reactions or responses to what's going on. So next, I'd kind of like to keep going with that theme and invite Rigo to share about your work with youth in particular. How do you support the youth of Orange County through Resilience Orange County in resilience, which is all about adjusting to changing circumstances?
Yeah, most definitely. As we all know, through this public health crisis, the most vulnerable communities are the ones being the impacted most. But we can't forget about what is happening. That a lot is happening aside from the pandemic. Also, the Trump administration still is continuing to end DACA. There is still an increase in militarizing the border, the continued use of ICE in our local jails and in our communities, and detaining our children. And we're experiencing a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of anxiety. I'm not gonna lie. As a DACA recipient who is about to transfer to a four-year university, I don't even know if I want to do Zoom university for the next semester, because I don't want to pay all those fees and all that. So within ROC, we noticed that there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of work up in the air that we don't know what's gonna happen. So within ROC, we are working towards having like events where we have health and wellness. We provide medicine. We provide a space for community to come in and share resources, because a lot of the times we don't know where to look for resources. So we come together within different organizations, different partners. We partner up. We discuss these issues. We are like, oh, this person is experiencing this. Let's show up and support for the community, or this person is doing this to support their own community. Let's show up and support that community. And it really shows how in a moment of crisis, community is the one who's really there representing one another. As y'all know, like the disaster relief funds were just recently given out this Monday, May 18th, and been in quarantine for almost 2 months. I mean, like a lot of people like have to pay rent. Bills are still being due. Like life hasn't stopped, and this creates a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. So within ROC, we're trying to support our community by creating our own fund that which we did, called the In La Cash Fund, that we released 3 weeks ago to support our community, which is not much, but we're still trying our best to be there to support our community. And I've actually talked to a lot more strangers, but strangers who are there to support the cause, to support families who are down to pick up. I've been in places where they pick up a basket of food and deliver to the people who don't have a vehicle, who don't have access to drive around and for these food drives. It really shows how community is there for one another, and I really want to uplift that. And thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I know that you are really busy on a lot of projects for your work, even as you're finishing up as a student. And I really love the way you highlighted the role of community in kind of filling in those gaps that our systems have such glaring gaps, right? And so how do we organize on the ground in real time so that we can't let anyone fall through those cracks as a community? I know that you and David also have worked together and kind of know each other as well. And so maybe we can segue over to David on this similar topic, right? Like, for the audience out there listening, what can we do and what is being done that we can join in on during this time?
I want to encourage the folks that are on and you're listening or seeing the recording. This is one of the best times where being sheltered in place can give you a perspective, a much more local perspective, and hopefully through that more compassionate. We still live in segregated neighborhoods. There's still gated neighborhoods. Julie mentioned that we're still in enclaves. So that's a bigger systemic issue that needs to happen. But I think to open our eyes to our neighbors is one of the first things that we could do. I know that Orange County has various pockets all over where there are both the rich and the poor living miles, even streets away. And it's not that various. I do some work in South Orange County where growing a small group of people that are interested in supporting immigrant impacted communities in South Orange County. Me growing up in Santana, the only reason I went to South Orange County was because it was really nice and clean and beaches, and it was just picturesque. It's beautiful down there. So it kind of took a day to enjoy it. Never really saw that there were pockets of different communities, not just Latino, but different Asian and Middle Eastern and some Black communities that are hidden in South Orange County. And so the work that I'm doing with Resilience OC, kind of part of the Rapid Response Network in Orange County, is highlighting, is trying to get these communities out of the shadows. And a lot of them are the ones that work at the hotels and the restaurants, that make South Orange County very beautiful. And those people live there and they make their life there. And I think the first thing is to open your eyes to the changing demographics. Don't be afraid of them, and don't think that that's a sign of things to worsening. I think our faith can speak to that. At least my faith can speak to that, where the God that I worship asked me to love God and also to love my neighbor as part of my faith practice. And that's the first thing I would do. I think it's appropriate to share it here. The second thing, if you really want to really be respond to this faithfully, I would because there are many things. There's homelessness, there's immigration, there's issues in hotels, there's just a wide variety of things. Connect to something that really tugs at your heart and targets what you're doing. For me, I work I'm closer to immigration issues, but it intersects a lot with hotel workers. It intersects a lot with education. It intersects with housing. There's a lot of intersections with that. So I would do the research, and I would connect with local organizers and community organizations, and volunteering your time, giving your money, and spread that wealth, and to really connect with the people. I do not want to call anyone that wants to join a cause or an organization to make themselves feel better, or to think that some sort of cheap charity is what we're about. I think Orange County is known for that. We're really good at getting people out there and cleaning the streets and putting backpacks together for kids and all that. We could definitely do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if we think that that's what it means to enact and to do justice in Orange County, that's not the right thing. I think that's about a small percentage of it. I think a lot of us, if we really want to dig deep, we need to talk about advocacy, changing policies. We need to talk about the changing narratives in Orange County, especially around race, especially around economy. There is a lot of money in Orange County. A lot of it is old money or money that has been around for a while. And then we need to know what economically it would look like to shift that money to the growing demographic that is coming up. And a lot of us have been around to decolonize our, not just our faith, but to decolonize what we understand California to be, Orange County to be, to even grow closer to old narratives and indigenous narratives that could really give us a good idea of what it means to live here, to love the land, and to love one another. So I call, if you feel that way in any way, if you want to involve your faith in it, you could definitely come and talk to me. If faith is not really a factor, there are many organizations that we partner with that we could work with. So those are a few things, that ideas that I want to throw out there to those that are listening.
Thank you, David. That's really helpful in framing the different ways that people can get involved, right, in specific and effective ways. I also want to ask Hilda to jump on that and offer your perspective. You work with detainees, and you also carry an interfaith perspective into your work. So love to hear from you, Hilda.
Thank you. I kind of second what David just said, you know, coming from this interfaith perspective, where we view all people are sacred, and that includes people here in the US, across bars and across the border, right? And so I think it's extremely important for us to learn about the complicated immigration system that has only become more and more complicated in the past few decades, and understanding that racism has played a big part in creating it, this complicated, and the criminalizing of immigrants, right? We have a society where we tend to blame others and we demonize the other to scapegoat some of what is going on in our own country. And that is not right. So the very first thing that I feel needs to be done is always find ways to change that narrative and challenge these racist institutional systems that we have in place that have prolonged all of this history of demonizing the other. And we have seen it in history. We talked about that, you know, Jolie talked about the Chinese Act. We have the Japanese internments. We have had the Muslim ban most recently. We tend to forget, right, as a society here in the US, we tend to forget our history, our past history, and it's being repeated over and over again. So let us be intentional about not repeating the history, calling it out, and shifting that narrative that is always a scapegoating on the immigrants. Second, that goes along with that is we need to stop the exploitation of immigrants, both working, those that are working outside, but also those institutions that thrive on immigrants. In this case, the detention facilities, right? They thrive on detaining immigrants. So ICE is also one of these contributors. Homeland Security contributes into this, pass laws that continue to criminalize immigrants to feed into this system that is a for-profit system, needs to stop. Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity works with various immigrants. It's not just the undocumented, but also, you know, the legal US citizens, people from various ethnicities. We try to address the root causes of migration. We invite people to work on the work of sanctuary, of accompaniment, accompanying refugees, accompanying asylum seekers, visiting those that are inside the detention facility, advocating for their liberation. So we're going to only advocate for laws to become more just and fair. We also advocate to get those that are inside, to liberate them. And so we have these prayer vigils where we highlight these stories, their stories, and we invite people to donate so that we can pay their bond. A great story for me to tell is through our work, we were able to help Luis. Luis has been in detention for over 6 months. His wife does not work, so she's been seeking out various people's help to be able to fundraise $15,000 to pay us a bond for the release of her husband. And so we were able to accomplish that. We are hoping to see him released, hopefully by the end of the weekend. And so that is the kind of work that we do at the local level, but also advocating for just loss, right? I was thinking also the other parts that we've been advocating for, along with Cruz, like Jaimes said, was the stimulus that people receive. So when we talk about equity or righteousness, right? How righteous is it that us as U.S. citizens got $1,200 as the stimulus, and yet we have other members of our society that contribute just as much, but because they lack a Social Security, they did not, most states did not give them anything. I am very grateful that in the state of California, they got $500. But when we talk about equity, there's really no equity there. So no righteousness there, right? And that is what we are being called as people of faith. This is what I know that Cruz does it. I know that we do it. We try to share the stories while we challenge the narratives, and we advocate for true transformation. And so that is what you will be invited to. And I welcome you to visit our website, and hopefully you can join us. We've been having a lot of prayer services on Zoom, you know, and you're able to advocate. We've done great advocacy, all of us, through social media. So it's worked really well, and that's what you can make a difference from your house. You can really make a big difference right now from where we're at. So thank you.
Thank you, Hilda. I find it really encouraging that even in this time, there are ways to connect in faith and in advocacy and in action. And the narrative doesn't stop just because people are going out less, right? And so this is a chance to continue being really intentional about our role in that narrative. It's also the month of Ramadan. And so I wanted to invite Dania to share a couple of words from your perspective on how do we sustain ourselves through practices of faith and spirituality so that we can keep going in this unfolding narrative.
Thank you, Natasha. Honestly, everything that all of my panelists that I'm sharing the space with have said really resonated, and I would echo all of it because that's pretty much the same thing, even in Ramadan. So Ramadan was a little bit different this year for a lot of people because we're under stay-at-home orders, and so not being able to go to the mosque or have those community dinners together was a shift for a lot of people who are used to that. However, in my family, it's actually not that different for us because we grew up knowing that Ramadan for us was a time of more internal, intimate reflection. And so for me, I see it as this 1 month where we've gotten to recharge now. We're being forced. Maybe this was a little moment from God where he's like, I want you to sit down and reflect on everything that you've been doing and how do you rearrange it to better serve your community and to better serve yourself and your family. And I found that this time has enabled me to do a lot more for my community and myself than I used to be able to do because I've been able to shift my perspective and recalibrate my timing and the things that I spend time on and the way that I actually execute tasks. So I feel like it's been a very spiritual journey as well that recharged me into looking outwards into my community and a lot more differently, even in the art spaces as well. So I think this is a good time for a lot of organizers to also remember that part of serving others is making sure that we are taken care of as well without overstepping that bounds of the excessive selfishness that usually starts to come with self-care, but knowing that the way we serve the community is by recharging ourselves and understanding what our mission is, what God has asked us to do for the community. And a small action point that I've been thinking of in this time for the Middle Eastern communities or any other refugee and immigrant communities is, with school being out and with many schools maybe not being able to get back in person, a lot of these young immigrants and refugees with English as their second language are now struggling even more because they don't have that community and the socialization opportunities of being with their peers in school. So offering tutoring services and ways to help them through Zoom, or if in-person becomes a possibility in the fall, just helping them with that as they adjust to online school curriculums moving forward. So that's something I'm thinking of, and I know that there are organizations that were already doing tutoring to support refugee populations, but I know they were in Los Angeles. So I'm trying to see if I can kind of gather something up for Orange County in the fall.
Thank you. Those are really important pointers and tips that we can all put into practice. So thank you, Dania. Teresa, you opened us up so beautifully today with your poetry and with the images from all the activism that you and your husband have been a part of through the years. And in some of those pictures, we saw you holding a sign with 3 mysterious letters, RIT. And so I would love for you to share with us what those are and what they stand for.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Gagandhi. Thank you, all the panelists. Your words and what you do is food for the soul. Thank you all for this. And well, speaking about RIT is an acronym that stands for respect, inclusion, and tolerance. And it's the same in English and in Spanish. Have you practiced RIT today? ¿Has practicado RIT hoy? And RIT came before my poems. I've been sharing RIT in countless marches, prayers, vigils, rallies, you name it, for I think more than 10 years now. So it's not a solo thing because I wouldn't be able to do all of this without my husband's support, and I'm very happy that I can share it with you today. I have talked to many people about all of this, and I have encountered different opinions, and that have helped me in so many ways, in deeper levels as well. I know it's not something easy to do, but I think it's feasible, especially in a society like this one in America. We are a melting pot, and I think it's important that we try to exercise mutual respect, to be inclusive, and also try to be tolerant. For me, is a key ingredient to live better in a society. I don't have to agree with another points of view or beliefs or tastes in food or whatever you want to do. But I need to be inclusive. I need to be respectful, because the other's point of view will enrich me, and I like that. I like to be enriched by other people's perspectives. I like that. Yeah. So it's my little contribution to better our world.
Thank you, Teresa. And the fact that, you know, that has sustained you for 10 years of activism, I think really speaks to the power of, you know, knowing our values and being willing to live it out consistently.
Yeah.
And we're also so honored to have one of your values kind of breathed into life through poetry. I would love it if you could read for us another one of your pieces, the Mater Dolorosa. And let's keep in mind as we listen to this piece, this overall narrative that we're part of as people living in the US. What does it mean to be a part of this narrative with those values of respect, inclusion, and tolerance? So the floor is yours, Teresa.
Thank you so much. This piece is dedicated to a very dear friend and artist. He's an exceptional human being, Mater Dolorosa. And Mater Dolorosa is one of his sculptures about the plight of the immigrants. And here it is, Mater Dolorosa. My children, my little ones, I look at you and my heart rends. How I wish I could hold each and every one, and thus take you to safe harbor. I can feel your pain, your helplessness, your desperation. I am silent witness of the tragedy of men. I've seen dreams and desires become a reality. I also have witnessed with sorrow the shame and disgrace that many suffer trying to search a safe harbor under my shelter. How I wish my torch would light up the deepest paths of the human heart, there, where the best and the worst of each one dwells, where the fiercest battles have taken place, and from where the most sublime feelings arise. Thus, with that spark, with that beam, seek brotherhood and not separation, fortune and not misfortune, life and not death of the many who clamor my shelter and protection. Thank you. Thank you all.
That was beautiful, Teresa. What a way to end a very fruitful discussion with all of our storytellers and experts. I want to thank each and every one of you once again for being so generous with your personal experiences, your expertise, and your time. This is asking a lot of you in this time where you have so many other demands, so we really could not have done this without you, and we really appreciate the participation that you've given us. Also, a special thanks to Dot Leach, who had helped us moderate this conversation and prepare for today, who could not be with us today, but we also could not have done this amazing panel without her. So as we end, I would like us to listen to another piece of art from one of our own, Dreamer, original music by Yeeun Kim. And once again, we thank you for joining us today.
Dream on, sweet dreamer. Stars still shine above your Dream on, darling dreamer. I know you're strong, I know you can. Dream on, sweet dreamer. Close your eyes, count to 3 and take a deep breath. Dream on, darling dreamer. I'll help you like you help me. Someday we'll see the world go anywhere we please. Someday we'll sleep in peace. Love anyone we choose. Dream on, sweet dreamer. That your mind is real. Dream on, darling dreamer. Your feet are bound, but your heart is free.